Imagine this. Your child is sitting in a classroom, staring out the window, fidgeting non-stop, like zoning out completely. And the teacher calls their name, but they miss the question again. And you see the frustration and the defeated look in their eyes, and you wonder, is this really the best way for them to learn? For so many kids with ADHD, traditional school feels like a daily battle because it's rigid schedules, endless worksheets, sitting down still and quiet, a system that just isn't built for the way that their brain works. But what if learning could be different? What if education could actually work with your child's brain instead of against it? And that is what we're diving in today, because homeschooling it isn't just for Pinterest mums or for former teachers. It's real, it's flexible, and it's surprisingly doable that, it can completely transform learning for kids with ADHD. And today's guest, Linsey Knerl, is going to show us exactly how to make it work without losing your job or your mind or your sanity. So parents, if you've ever thought about homeschooling or even just wished school could be easier for your child, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello parents, this is Dana Kay here, and welcome back to another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. If you've ever watched your child struggle in a traditional classroom, feeling that restlessness, that frustration, or just not fitting in, you're not alone. So many parents wonder, is there a better way? But when homeschooling comes up, it can really sort of feel impossible. Like you'd have to quit your job, become a full-time teacher, or completely turn your life upside down. But what if I told you that homeschooling doesn't have to be overwhelming, that it can actually be easier, more flexible, and even less stressful, especially for kids with ADHD? And that's exactly what we're diving in today with my guest, Linsey Knerl. She is a mum of 6. Total hats off to her on that one, who has been homeschooling since 2004. She's the author of Homeschool Hacks, How to Give Your Kid a Great Education Without Losing Your Job or Your Mind. And she's here to break it down exactly how homeschooling can work, even for families who never thought it was possible. So if you've ever considered homeschooling or you just want more options to help your child thrive, this episode is packed with insights you don't want to miss. Linsey, welcome so much to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. And I was just saying before we launched this episode that I don't think I've ever done an interview on homeschooling. And so that's why I'm super excited for you to be here today. Look, there's so many parents with kids with ADHD that feel overwhelmed by the idea of homeschooling. What's probably that first thing that you'd say to a parent who's curious but feeling that bit of uncertainty or unsure if they can do it?
Sure. So one thing I've been in a lot of groups with parents who have children of, various learning abilities, challenges, styles. And I find that parents of kids with ADHD are fiercely invested in their children already. They're going to the meetings, they're making the phone calls, they're finding the doctors that are going to be more helpful than harmful. They're meeting with other parents. They're putting a lot of time and effort already into this process. And I feel like for many of them, it's a full-time job. And then at the end of the day, they still don't quite have that control or influence that they really felt like they had. There's a lot of trying things that they know probably aren't going to work, but they have to try it because that's the way it's been done for so many years. And that's the way it's done in the state or in the school system. And so I feel like they, as far as time and energy, they're already putting in the work. Homeschooling just kind of gives them more of an opportunity to make sure that all of it is very intentional, very personalized to their child. And then at the end of the day, if the gut feeling is, you know what, this is not good for my child, or this is harming my child, or we've tried this, why do we have to do it again? You can just be the boss and say, you know what, we're not going to. I know my child very well.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate you saying that, because it is a lot of parents out there, they're just constantly managing so many things. Another feeling that I can think the parents would feel when thinking about homeschooling is that they're worried that they're sort of not qualified enough, to homeschool, especially if they struggled in school themselves. What would you say to those parents?
Yeah, so, we've kind of gone in this evolution of homeschooling where it was the 90s and mom sits at the table and she's teaching all the subjects. And so she has to read everything the night before and figure out what the Algebra 2 lesson is and then present it the next day, which is really asking a lot of parents. And that's not what I'm referring to really when I talk about homeschooling. We have tutors and online courses and co-ops and ways to connect children with mentors and people that are really well versed and passionate about the things that they teach. So the responsibility to do the educational part of it doesn't fall to the parent alone. I think more what parents need to think about is that, especially if they dealt with this as a child themselves, they have a deep empathy, a deep understanding, and they can kind of see where their child's high limit switch is. So, a lot of times that frustration that happens right before there's a meltdown, the parent can see that, right? They've known their child, they know when it's coming. If they were at home, they would say, you know what? Let's take a break. Let's walk away. Let's work on something else for a while and we'll come back to this. Or they know what time of day their child is maybe not as strong, and with their control of their emotions, or maybe it's harder for them to stay focused and they can work around those things. I think just the knowing of your child gives you so much more space to try things and even fail, because you can make up for it in so many ways with just the empathy and the understanding that can't happen on a large scale in a classroom where there are 30 other students and the teacher, just as much as he or she may try, just can't offer that same individualized attention.
Yeah, no, you're right there, and you touched on there's so many resources out there. You said there's online classes, there's this, there's that. Can you just maybe like break it down for us? Like, what does a day look like? What could a day look like? And I know that you're probably going to say it can look like whatever you want it to look like, but let's just can you just walk us through visualizing what it could look like?
Yeah, so I'll kind of share kind of maybe what it looks like in my home with different
Yeah.
ages and different abilities and different stages. And then just understand that I am very well aware that anything is possible is almost scarier than here's my choice. And because decision fatigue is just something we all don't need, especially if you're a parent with ADHD, that's just not another thing you need to deal with. So in our house, it's very much like we kind of get up when it naturally is the kids' natural rhythm. Say it's time to get up. That might be 7 for some, 8 for others. We have chores we do outside because we live on a homestead. The animals get taken care of. That helps the children kind of learn empathy and responsibility, get outside a little bit. They come in, they usually make their own breakfast, to fry up some eggs or some toast or oatmeal. They chat and talk and kind of interact. And then everyone's off to their own subjects. I usually set some kind of expectation that we're going to do 3 subjects in a day. It's up to you which ones you want to do that day, but you have to cover a certain amount of material or hit certain goals by the end of the week. For some children, they need a little more interaction to be like, okay, we're not going to hit our goals if we don't work a little harder today. And other kids are just, they don't need as much direction. So personality really plays a big part in that. And then some of it is reading in a book and doing workbooks, kind of like you see at the dining room table. Some kids are learning from apps on their phones. Some are online taking a live course. with a tutor with an umbrella school. Some are taking online self-paced college courses as dual enrollment so they can earn credit while they're still in high school. And then, we have some kids that just would do nothing more than sit under a blanket and read all day long. And that's how they prefer to take in their information. And so we're just handing them books on their topics and doing more like Oxford style chats about what you've learned. And while all this is going on, I'm either sitting in the dining room doing my work because I run a business, or if my husband's home that day, he'll sit and do it so I can come into my office and do things like podcast interviews or like deep thinking work where I can't really be stopped and interrupted by the kids. And then, we usually eat at least one meal together. We clean up, do tidying chores in the evening. And then if everything's done, I let my kids play video games. That is how they connect with each other. And then they have grown siblings that get online and they all kind of play together and chat and talk about what's going on in their lives. And that is pretty much it. We have activities 1 or 2 times a week, vocal and debate, where they interact with other children and they learn from other teachers. And we school year round. So that includes the summer. That way, if we have like a meltdown day or we have the flu or we're just kind of not into it, we don't have to try to play catch up throughout the year. It's just kind of spread out, more like a 4-day school week. If you really think about how much we're really actively focusing on our work. Is that like the long answer?
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I think it gives a real visual of what it could look like. I'm curious, how old are your children?
So now I have an 11-year-old, 15, 18-year-old senior in high school. And those are my 3 boys that are home. I have a 19-year-old that's doing a gap year at home. He has a dysgraphia, dyslexia diagnosis. And so we're kind of doing some life skills things, making sure we're driving safely and doing some jobs, employment, and just kind of getting that last minute, like, okay, what do we need to do so we feel really good about going to college in the fall?
Fantastic. You mentioned something called an umbrella school. Do you want to just dive a little bit deeper into what that looks like?
Yeah, so like depending on the state, there might be some schools that are like registered as high schools in that state, but then they allow homeschoolers to do the curriculum kind of at their own pace and their own style, mix and match, however they want to do, with the understanding that you can come in underneath that school. They may have like you have to do this in a year, this in a year. It just really depends on the state. But the point is you can have the flexibility of the at-home homeschooling with kind of the covering of the legality and the regulations of a different school. So it costs a little more usually, but I can sign my kids up for like art and have an art teacher that's been doing, studio art for their whole lives, and they have a thriving career, and they can talk to the children about what it's like to run an art-based business. That's something I'm not going to read in a book and teach them. So I really like to use umbrella schools for like extracurriculars, things like maybe philosophy or just courses that are a little too lofty for me, and maybe we don't have access to that kind of teacher in our very small rural area in Nebraska.
Okay, so if they were to do an art class, would it be online through the school in that way, with a cohort of students?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Fantastic. No, it's great that they can get that that coverage of all the different areas, because obviously as parents we think to ourselves, well, we're not experts in everything, for sure. So you did mention cost. I'm curious, what are some of the costs that are associated with homeschooling?
So there's I think a statistic going around, especially right now, I've seen it in the news multiple times, that the average is $600 a student. I say ignore that. It's the average of like how much you spend to feed your kid. That is such a number, where we can look at what the USDA says you should be feeding your child. And then they even have like a range that's like thousands of dollars difference, meaning, the person that spends their money on whole organics is going to be spending much different amount of money than someone who's, buying fast convenience foods or things that are, priced differently. So we can say the same thing about education. It's a fast, easy, good model. like the three legs of the stool. And what I tell parents is you can have an easy curriculum, a high quality curriculum, or a cheap curriculum. Two of the three. So because I'm busy and I work from home and I have a lot going on, I look for a really good curriculum and an easy curriculum, but it's not going to necessarily be cheap. But if I'm a stay-at-home mom that's not working outside of the house and I have a lot more time and I'm okay with checking out library books and putting together my own curriculum and switching with friends and trying things out and kind of, taking a less, more time to do it, then I can spend a lot less and still have a really good curriculum. So those are the trade-offs. You could spend nothing, $50 to $100, library cards and craft supplies. But taking those online classes, they can cost anywhere from $300 to $700 for a good online course. And when I purchase those things, I know what I'm getting in return. I understand the value. And as long as you understand the value of what you're getting, it's like a private school or a good daycare or any of these other things that we feel like, what is the limit for making sure my child is safe and cared for? And I don't know that we can say what the price is.
Yeah, no, I love how you explain that. And I think that is a really, really good way to look at it. And, I kind of use the comparison. I talk a lot about, toxins in our foods. And I say with organic food, for example, it's really every family needs to manage their own budget. While 100% organic food is best, not everyone can afford that. And so there is that scale and, teaching families of where they should focus their money as opposed to, how much this is going to cost if we do it all. So I appreciate the way that you explained that with the stool. I just want to take a step back. Obviously you've got older children. And so I know that I've got a number of listeners out there that would be thinking to myself, okay, well, 11-year-old, 15-year-old, yeah, I can see how homeschooling wouldn't be as hard as if you have, say, a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old. So I assume that you've been homeschooling for a number of years. So can you maybe just paint a picture in a day of a homeschooler for the younger ages?
Yeah, so I had the same question asked just a couple days ago because, younger kids need a level of attention that, especially if they have ADHD, it's just you're always on as a parent. You're just always on because you just don't know what they might need or what might happen, and there's just kind of this sense of always being on. So I recognize that, and it's a different kind of being tired, and it's a different kind of level of commitment. But I will say that children at that stage don't need philosophy, algebra 2, formal art classes, sports activity. It's the expectations of what they actually need for education are much, much lower and smaller and more intimate and more homegrown. So, open play, blocks. I had one child that likes those little magnetics. He would 4 to 5 hours just building things on the floor where he would actually have to pull him away and say, okay, we need to do other things now. But what we were able to do with him through the things he just naturally gravitated to, what color is this block? Let's spell it. Let's do it. It's more natural for you as a parent at that age. And the kids need much, much fewer hours of instruction, like maybe 2, maybe 3. So the rest of the time, they're just being kids and they're playing or maybe they're helping you with chores. We a lot of times overcomplicate what a very young child's education needs to look like. And I get a little frustrated when I get into a new homeschool group online and they say, I want to homeschool my 3-year-old. What does it look like? What should I buy? And I said, they're 3. Read them some really good books and snuggle up on the couch and let them help feed the cat and talk about why the clouds look this way and just kind of be still a little bit, because that kind of helps them regulate, right? They don't need all that extra going on. It helps you kind of not put so much pressure on yourself as a parent. And you can set little milestones that would mimic a curriculum or educational goals. But at 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6, a lot of the learning is like coming through osmosis. And you don't want to give the impression that learning is work. you want them to stay naturally curious. So there's kind of this conflict in the homeschool world where we can sell a lot of things to parents of little children if we can make them feel really insecure that kind of the more natural ways of learning and parenting are inadequate. But keep in mind that that's marketing. And so we have to be kind of careful that we're not buying into that I need to buy something to replace the school I took them out, when there was probably a reason you took them out. It was because it wasn't working to have such a formal scenario, and you liked them being able to spend time with you and be more curious and ask questions. So we have to remember what the big main goal is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. If we're looking at sort of say the 6 to 9 year old, we've touched on the smaller kids, we've touched on the older kids. What about the middle ranges?
Those are the most difficult. And I've been blessed because as I've had more children, my older children have naturally created kind of these mentoring bonds. We know that in the classroom, when we have older students mentoring or teaching younger students, it's good for the older students. It gives them purpose and they're less likely to get into trouble because they feel like they can be a positive role model. And the younger students feel valuable because they're like, look at this older person who could be doing something else, but they're spending time with me. And so I think for building good, healthy human bonds, having the older siblings or maybe an older sibling of another family in a co-op, assisting, helping, handing out snacks, standing over the child saying, oh, 3 plus 2, are you sure it's 6? Let's take some Cheerios and count this out. Kids naturally want to do that sort of thing. They just kind of need to be given permission. So in our house, it's very common for me to say, you don't understand that algebra problem. It's been quite a few years since I've done that, but your brother just did it 2 years ago. Ask him what he did to kind of get through that. And if he doesn't know or he can't remember, then we'll call in my math professor friend, or we'll go online, or we'll go to Khan Academy, or we'll figure this out. But usually 9 times out of 10, an older sibling or an older student that has just been through that is the best person to kind of guide them onto that next level.
Okay, but what if that older student isn't available? We probably have a lot of listeners that have kids in that age group, that 6 to 10 years old, and me personally, if I think about that learning, especially when my son was back in that day, I think to myself, wow, that would be really overwhelming for me. So yeah, just talk to us a little bit about that.
So yeah, let me ask you, when you say overwhelming, and I think everyone kind of has a different idea, what is the overwhelming part? Is it the attention that you're going to give that you have to find out of your day? Is it the fact you might do it wrong and then they won't learn how to read, or they won't learn how to, I guess, what is the pressing concern?
That's a really good question. I think that overwhelm will be different for every family that would be listening. But if I was thinking back into when my children were that age, I would feel, as a working mom, how can I give my child the attention they need, those 2 or 3 hours, and be there to help them through the learning process?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously childcare being kind of a separate but really valid concern, because children can't raise themselves at home. It's not the 80s anymore. We don't get to do that. They would need to have, supervision. But even if, let's say, they're with a grandma while you're at work, or you're doing split shift and sharing the responsibilities with a partner or spouse, there's still that 2 to 3 hours you have to be available and present. And I found that I can find that time if I'm willing to give some things up. It might be scrolling my Facebook. It might be, instead of me listening to a podcast while I'm doing the dishes, I do the dishes and I have my son sit next to me, and we say, okay, what are we learning? Where are we having some issues? I think that self-paced learning has worked best for us, because on the days they're doing really well, we can really fly through some stuff. And then the days when we're struggling a little bit, we can kind of set it aside. And there's no penalty for not getting through a lesson a week or whatever that is. And the other thing is just the format of your schooling. So for a lot of my kids' learning, they're watching the videos, they're understanding it, they're answering the questions, they're taking the quizzes. It's just me checking the work and kind of checking in on them. And then the rest is just teaching them the skills. And that takes the hardest the hardest part. And 6 to 9 is about that age where
Mm.
kids are either going to get really excited about doing their schoolwork or they're going to be really discouraged. And it might be subject based. And it's really parenting. And I hate to say, like, oh, you need 2 to 3 hours a day to parent. But these skills that I ended up teaching my children so they could do their schoolwork were the parenting things I needed to do with them to equip them to be in a world that's kind of hard and tough and is going to expect a lot of them. And they have a little bit of a disadvantage with whether it's the dyslexia or the ADHD. So I don't want to say like you have to find the time because you're a parent, but if you're making the commitment to do this, and like I said, a lot of parents are already on the phone 2 to 3 hours a day talking to schools. They're getting homework sent home and they're sitting with their child who's crying
Mm.
over their homework and they're already kind of struggling through this a couple hours a day. If you could turn that struggle time into purposeful, let's take this and move ahead time, I think we have it. It's kind of mindset. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Makes total sense. And I was just about to say, I appreciate that you're flipping the script. I appreciate that it is this mindset shift, that, if you're going to go down this path that, parents need to have. Now, you've talked a lot about, online learning, watching videos, and by the sounds of it, that's obviously a big part of homeschooling in these days. But for kids with ADHD, screens can be both helpful and
Mm-hmm.
distracting and can cause problems in their own right. So how can parents decide if online learning is a good fit for their child?
Yeah. So, I mean, this really also comes down to your family values too. I know families that are completely 100% screen free. They're very happy with it. We chose to incorporate screens for a couple reasons. One, I use screens. My kids are looking at me. They're saying, okay, we can't have screens, mom, but then you can have screens. And how does this work? I realized kind of early that we were going to have problems with screens if we didn't figure out how to manage them.
Mm.
There's a day my kids will go off to college and I won't be able to, check their phones to see who they're talking to. And so, how do we get them from where they are now, where they want to be on the iPad watching, I don't know, pressure washing videos or whatever kids watch for hours and hours and hours, to some, being able to use technology responsibly, because we do know the stats about, kids and depression and staying up all night on their phones
Mm.
in college. And I knew this was just going to be an issue if we didn't get a handle on it. So we try to kind of incorporate screen responsibility or good stewardship of screen time as part of the homeschool. And we have not always succeeded. We've had our failures. We've had talks where we're like, you can't be trusted to watch YouTube, even, because you watch too many videos or you're not watching what you're supposed to be watching. So we're very involved in that. But I think just helping them realize how to watch a video or interact with an online tutor in a healthy way. That might be all the screen time they get that day, and that's fine. Um, for us, it just hasn't worked to be like no screen time because it
Mm.
has to be, I guess, managed to a place where they can walk out of the house. And I think homeschooling or any kind of parenting is getting your kid to be like a healthy, well formed adult. And so for us, we had to figure out how do we get from here to there, use screens for education, but not as a replacement for parenting or a way to waste time. And then make sure we're constantly checking in and being like, are you using this for the purpose in which it was created? Or are we using it to escape? Or are we using it to, you know, I guess do things we're not supposed to do? And then we really watch our children. If they look like the screen time is not good for them, we just step away and we say, for 3 weeks, we're going to not even do this. We're going to go fishing. We're going to read out of books. We're going to do some more hands-on stuff. And that's why I do like the self-paced, is because if we step away, we don't get in trouble. There's not some test that they missed.
Yeah, no, I the way that you explain that I think is great, and every family that has to do what works for their family and their child. Screens are not necessarily a bad thing, but agree that when they are unmanaged, and we're not teaching children how to use them in a healthy way, they can be detrimental to brain health
Mm-hmm.
and growth and things like that. We do have a screen time guide actually, that we will drop into the show notes for families that they can download if they're looking how to manage those screen time devices. Just talking about this topic made me remember that guide that we have. So we will share that with the listeners as well. So check out the show notes for that. Now, many parents, I assume, would worry about doing this all on their own. Parenting a child with ADHD a lot of the time feels like you are on an island on your own, and it's very isolating. So can you maybe just dive into what kind of outside support or resources are available to help, and when should parents sort of seek extra help?
I say seek extra help from the very beginning. You're more likely to stick to what you decided you wanted to do if you don't feel like you're now all of a sudden alone or you misunderstood the assignment, right? Immediately once you find out maybe you're considering homeschooling, I would reach out to either local, geography-based, or interest-based. So there's a lot of ADHD homeschooling national type informal groups that can be good for basic questions like what has worked for you, or I'm sure a lot of people in your audience are already part of some communities, whether online or locally, and so there's probably someone in there that homeschools already, and they may have their own little subgroup that deals with this specifically. But also, don't feel like you have to be with other parents with children of ADHD. Sometimes it's good to kind of get out of that so that our full identity isn't parent of ADHD child, because that kind of gives you inspiration to think, what could we try? Why not my child? And maybe they can't do it right away. But you can start planning for some possibilities and say, I'd like my child to be able to do this at some point. This is a goal in a couple of years. Let's see what we can't do to get them to be able to sit for an hour in this class and work on this activity with their friends and not have meltdowns or not feel, that they're struggling. And I think it's good to see also that there are some older parents in those homeschooling groups who maybe didn't have the diagnosis like we have now, because we weren't diagnosing children the way we are now. And they kind of can look back and you go, thinking about it, we had a lot of these same challenges. We didn't know that's what that was. So those older mentors that have kind of been through it, maybe they don't have the label or the diagnosis, but they know the tips and the tricks and the ways to kind of say, here, mom, this is how you take care of yourself. And here's how to ask for help. And here's how to admit when the day's just kind of blown and you should just lay on the couch and read a book together. They can add that perspective that maybe is necessary because it's kind of coming outside of that identifying as a parent of an ADHD child.
Yeah, it sounds like, it's great advice, seeking those like local communities and those online support groups. It does sound like an amazing community, and, looking for a mentor, what you were suggesting, that older mentor, I think that could be really helpful and beneficial for families starting out new. Now, if parents listening today, and think to themselves, okay, maybe I want to explore homeschooling, what's the first best step for them to take?
Yeah, so the first best step would be to figure out the logistics before you look at curriculum, before you look at classes, before you look at co-ops or groups. Figure out, how are you going to be able to still continue to work if you want to continue to work or need to continue to work? What does childcare look like in the times when you're working? Like, figure out logistically how that would look. For some people, that is the hardest thing and the only thing holding them back, and it can take them 6 months to a year to kind of like figure that out. It may be a job change situation, and you don't have to commit to doing it, but just kind of do that thought experiment of, okay, I'm giving myself permission to explore this. If I'm serious, what changes do we need to make as a family? Because a lot of times people immediately go, if I want to homeschool my kid, what workbooks do we use? And I've sat with them on the phone and I've handheld with them and I've said, okay, here's some things you can do. And then at the end of the day, they're like, I never really even thought about the fact that I can't afford to stop working and I don't have a work from home job and I don't have a partner that can help me. And really this could never happen. And I think, okay, first things first, your child needs to be like cared for, watched. They need child care. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is just how will you continue to get your child's needs met from an expertise? Like if they have an IEP or they're using certain service providers, or they have, let's say, a really good relationship with a teacher that might be disruptive, what kinds of things can we do to still maybe keep some of those touch points if they're appropriate and healthy? And if they're not, what would we replace them with? Before we look at math, science, reading, just the basic supports that we already have. And I think with a lot of the states kind of rolling out those ESAs, some of those can be used for therapies and assessments and things that might have been in the school-based IEP. So we're not having to just completely cut everything off completely.
No, that's really good advice. What does that look like? So if a kid does have an IEP at a traditional school, how do you continue to get those services when you're homeschooling?
Yeah, and that's state-based, which is why it's such a tricky answer. I know in my state and others like it where we really don't have a lot of the different options. You're really opting to cut off state-based funded supports. But I think in those states, we've also seen a lot of teachers and therapists and people kind of starting their own businesses. And we've seen solutions pop up. So there are little co-ops and things that have kind of grown out of necessity that, you'd have to pay maybe out of pocket for, but it could in some ways be cheaper than doing the running and the round and taking off work and trying to figure out how you're going to do all these appointments. Parents have made it work, but your state is going to be very, very, very much determining that. And that's why I said finding a geographic-based homeschool parent group. You can just go in those groups and say, okay, we have an IEP. We're done with school at the end of the year. What do we need to do? And how do we continue some of these supports? The answer may be you're out of luck. The answer may be here's what we did. And I think just seeing what's been done specifically with other parents by example is the best thing.
It's amazing to hear by the sounds of it that all the states are so different in the way that they handle it. You were talking about, some changes and new things popping up. Homeschool has grown so much, especially for kids with special needs. Where do you see sort of the future of homeschool headed? How can parents sort of take advantage of these opportunities?
Well, the thing that's really exciting for me is when we decentralize some of the things that were always housed within the public school system. And I don't want to get onto I don't want things to be taken away from kids that are in the school system. I just know that we have teachers retiring who maybe were like, I'm done. But now they're like, no, I think I'm going to start a little home-based consultancy, or I'm going to meet with children who need a little bit of reading assistance. I think with this kind of explosion in home education, you're seeing a lot of people seek new life in their careers, maybe a second career. They're becoming more entrepreneurial. And what I'm seeing is if there is a need, there will be a service provider for that need. If not right now, within the next 1 to 2 years, probably in just about every state and urban area. We're very rural, but we drive an hour for some of our services. And that's really not that far. That's a commute for a lot of people in a big city. And a lot of things are virtual too. Like we can get our dyslexia tutoring online via Zoom. And that's something we didn't have even 5 years ago. So there's more accessibility, there's more options, and there are way more service providers, which means that if there's one that doesn't work for your child, you're not stuck in that relationship. You can try to find a service provider that, kind of connects with them and understands the need, and maybe your child even likes, which helps them to move forward in their goals. It's just going to be very decentralized and more personalized, which definitely is not a bad thing.
Yeah, definitely not a bad thing. It's actually exciting to think about, the possibility in the future. We know that the world has changed a lot since 2020, and it has probably caused that explosion of so many new services and so many new opportunities out there. I think that traditional schooling needs to change. I think the world that we live in these days is so different from what it used to be, but schools haven't adapted. And so, I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing, your knowledge and your passion. I ask every guest this before we finish up episode. If you could share just one small actionable tip that parents can start using today, what would that be?
I would say that if you are going to homeschool your child and you have made the decision and you're wondering what you're going to do on day one, the very first thing you will do is not school your child. Most kids need a time at home to kind of decompress and figure out how they feel about the change. And to also kind of reacclimate to being at home and spending a lot of time with mom and dad. Um, I think that parents want to just right off the bat, they get real excited about the thing that they've bought, their books and their shiny new pencils, and they're like, let's go. And we need time when the child first comes home to figure out, what were they really struggling with? Because maybe you couldn't see that while they were at school. And most importantly, what are they really excited about? If you have a child that's just obsessed with frogs and science and that sort of thing, that would be the first thing I would start with teaching them. I wouldn't start with the math or the reading. I would say, we're going to hit the ground running with some science and really capitalize on that natural curiosity and interest, and then build on the essentials from there. So slow down, take time to know your child, and build on the things that are naturally already there so that they can associate homeschooling with, we started out with these successes, not my mom's teaching me math now and I hate it and I've always hated math.
Linsey, I love that. Give your child time, give yourself time. Figure out your new normal. I talk about that a lot. This is going to be a totally new normal, and giving yourself time. You don't like. I wouldn't think just to stop and not school for a bit, just to give that time. So I love that piece of advice. Linsey, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your passion today. It really is so refreshing to hear that homeschooling doesn't have to be complicated or overwhelming, and that it can actually sort of work for so many different family styles. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
I actually am not using a lot of social media now, but linseyknerl.com is my website. And people can reach me through there. And I get a lot of emails from parents just asking lots of little questions. I'm always happy to answer it with anything I can help with. So,
but also your book. Tell everyone about
yes,
your book.
I have a book, Homeschool Hacks, How to Give Your Kid a Great Education Without Losing Your Job or Your Mind. And it's available wherever books are sold online. So it's a lot of places. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again for joining me. Parents, if today's episode really got you thinking about homeschooling, I encourage you to explore it with curiosity. Maybe that means doing a little research, sort of talking to other homeschooling families in online communities like Linsey mentioned, or just shifting your mindset about what education can look like. And if you found this conversation helpful, please share it with another parent who might be considering homeschooling or just feel stuck in their child's current education system. Look, the more options we know about, the better that we can support our children's. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode filled with all of these amazing expert insights to help your child thrive. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kate, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.